ask Melanie.
All right. Welcome everyone to the May 15th NYCERS investment meeting. Ms. Winery, will you please call the roll?
Good morning, Chair, Mayor's Office.
Brian Berge, representing Mayor Eric Adams, present, along with Kevin Liu and Nadia Fajulina from my office.
Comptroller's Office.
Allison Hirsch, representing Comptroller Brad Lander, along with John Dorsa.
Public Advocate's Office. Borough President, Manhattan.
Good morning, Keisha Sutton James. Thank you. Good morning, Keisha Sutton James, representing Borough President Mark Levine.
Borough President, Brooklyn.
Karina Lozada, representing Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Borough President, Bronx.
Robert Miraglia, representing Borough President Vanessa L. Gibson.
Borough President, Queens.
Alan Swisher for Queensborough President Donovan Richards.
Borough President, Staten Island.
Dan Master, representing Vito Pacello, Staten Island Borough President.
Borough President, International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Lawrence Bosley, Julie Colby, and Ruben Torres for President Gregory Ford.
Transport Workers Union. District Council 37. We have.
So Brian, if I may, I'd like to ask that Sandy, I see that you're on. If you could just acknowledge any BERS personnel and trustees that are on.
Hi, this is Salil. Sandy actually said that he's logged in, but for me to do introduction in case he has stepped away. There are the only trustees I see, both Allison and yourself as designees. So we don't have quorum for this meeting, but we'll take this up at our next trustee meeting. And there's a few people sort of on the directory with phone numbers and login names. I don't know who they are, but that's all I have.
All right, and we'll
Hi, this is Karina Paul, and I'm present.
Great, thank you, Karina. So we would just ask anyone, once we go into executive session, that those folks that have phone numbers just identify themselves before we proceed. I will note this is public session, so members of the public are entitled to join for this session. So I'd like to say good morning, and we're going to hop into today's presentation. We have one item that we're going to conduct in public session, and then we're going to go into executive session to discuss specific investment matters. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Allison if she just wants to introduce the topic, and her and Steve are going to walk us through the results of the study and recommendations to go forward.
Yes, and I want to note for the record that Kate Visconti, Chief of Staff for the Bureau of Asset Management, is also here and will be asked to pinch hit during this presentation, as she is the one who is driving it. She is also putting together some packets for the trustees that we will be circulating momentarily. I think we can go to the next slide. So, just to contextualize the presentation that I'm about to open, I just want to remind folks of the background and what we are discussing today. So first and foremost, I just want to say we're not asking for any action to be taken today. Today is for discussion with the hope that we can act next month after more discussion, and we know this is a big topic, and so it may take some time. So just to remind folks of how we got here, about a year and a half ago, we embarked on what we called the Strategic and Tactical Accountability Review of BAM. With the support of the trustees, we brought a resolution to this board and the other 4 boards to begin a review process to assess how the Bureau of Asset Management is or is not effectively executing the will of the trustees and providing services to trustees of the 5 systems. We, each board identified one labor representative, 1 or 2, I think NYCERS had 2 labor representatives to sit on a STAR oversight committee. Brian and the Mayor's Office of Pension Investments also sat on that oversight committee. And, excuse me, that committee then went about putting together an RFP and identifying a consultant to execute the review. The committee decided on McKinsey to execute that review. They came on, I believe, in October of 2023 and finished their review and recommendations towards the middle to end of February. Simultaneously, the Comptroller's Office began a study of compensation for employees within the Bureau of Asset Management and hired Mercer to execute that study. To assess how the Bureau of Asset Management pays its staff in relationship to peers, both primarily peer pension funds, but also in government, nonprofit endowments, et cetera. And Mercer completed their review towards the middle to end of March. At the same time, or actually before that, the Comptroller's Office also went into executed a review of the economically targeted investment program. As you all know, 2% of our assets are allocated or supposed to be allocated towards economically targeted investments across all of our assets. Right now, we have about 1% allocated towards ETIs, and we have not added new programs or expanded those programs for about a decade, even longer. And so we wanted to do a review of those programs and assess how we can modernize and move forward to actually get to a point where maybe we can reach our 2% allocation. And so David Ehrenberg was hired to take on that review. That actually was complete around the same time that McKinsey started, but rather than bringing the boards and trustees haphazard, multiple different recommendations, we decided to just sit on that and then come to you all with one coherent, holistic recommendation for the future of the Bureau of Asset Management, how it serves trustees, and how it executes these programs. Just to give a little bit more context, if you remember, at the beginning of April, I believe it was April 8th, McKinsey, so David Ehrenberg did a presentation for trustees, I want to say almost a long time ago with the initial results of his review. On April 8th, McKinsey and Mercer both presented the results of their findings with no implementation recommendations beyond from BAM. After that, on April 18th, the Bureau of Asset Management convened a Zoom with trustees, interested trustees from across all 5 systems to begin to lay out the broad strokes of recommendations. And today we are presenting the NYCERS specific recommendations that we would hope to gain support of in the coming month. Just to flag, I know this is a joint NYCERS and BERS investment meeting. Not surprisingly, the recommendations across systems are not all that different. BERS does, you should have received today the written documentation of the BERS recommendations, and we are happy to bring this to the next BERS meeting as well to get into specifics on the BERS component. Does anybody have any questions on the background? Or Steve, do you want to add any context?
Yeah, actually, Allison, thank you. You've done a great job describing what we're about to talk about today. But just for point of reference, the first 2 initiatives I kicked off within the first 2 weeks of joining the Bureau of Asset Management. And the impetus for the strategic and tactical accountability review really had a lot to do with some of the work that had been done in prior administration. So, for example, I had the privilege of reading the entire Funston report that was initiated back in 2014 or 15, which was much more internally focused and BAM-centric. And my thinking was that we could do a much better job servicing and supporting the needs of the trustees, and we needed to do that. And we wanted to do it in a way that was very collaborative, where we were listening, we had listening campaigns, and really figure out how we can better service and customize the delivery of BAM's capabilities to the different plans, noticing and obviously adhering to the fact that they're unique. They have different preferences, risk tolerances, funded ratios, et cetera. So again, important work. It's taken us about 22, 23 months to get here, but we're optimistic that we can execute on everything we're about to talk about today, and would love your feedback. As Allison said, this is just a starting point. There's no vote required or asked for today, but really just a presentation and then give you some time to think about things.
Any questions or anything before I move on to the substance? Okay, can we go to the next? So today we want to key in mostly on the second piece of this agenda, because most of what we were asking the boards to act on is the trust is included and incorporated in what we are introducing today as an annual trustee service compact. Before we get into that meat, we do want to update you. There are a couple recommendations coming out of the STAR review. One, that the Comptroller's Office can actually just execute to without trustee action to hopefully move things forward more quickly. And there are some that we aren't going to be acting on today, but want to flag for folks. So if we can go to the next slide just to talk about investment procurement. One of the issues that came up consistently when Brad first got elected, when Steve first came on board, throughout the STAR process is just how long it takes to execute a contract, particularly a public market contract in particular, and a public market investment contract in particular. So it takes, if the board might vote on to begin a search, and it could take 2 to 3 years to execute that search and come back with new contracts for new investments. So that's obviously problematic. And so McKinsey did a deep dive into the procurement process and identified 2 areas that we think we might be able to make changes, one immediate and one long-term after legal review. So one thing so I'm gonna go backwards and do the second one first. After legal review, we realized that other systems in New York State actually have different procurement policy board rules that allow them to move their procurement process faster. So this New York State Common, New York State teachers, the state PPB rule actually allows them to do public market investments, execute public market investments similar to how they execute private market investments. And we are able to execute private market investments in a matter of 2 to 3 months, as opposed to 2 to 3 years. So our legal team in the Comptroller's Office is starting to investigate whether that is something the New York City Procurement Policy Board could take up, or if there is a reason that New York City is structured so differently. So that is a body of work that is more long-term, because it'll take some time for legal review, and if they assess that actually we could make these changes, that is itself a process to get through the Procurement Policy Board. In the meantime, one of the things McKinsey discovered was that the internal steps that have been created within the Comptroller's Office themselves are redundant, overly bureaucratic, and take time. So there are, you can look at this slide, there are 20 plus handoffs of any given contract internally within the Comptroller's Office between the BAM procurement team, the agency chief contracting officer, OGs, the lawyers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they said, they are if we were to just cut down on our internal redundancies, they think that we could cut the procurement time in half. And we got approval from the controller, from the deputy controller of administration, from the agency ACO to establish a system to do that, whereby BAM will actually have its own ACO and contract legal resource, so that we don't have to get in the queue with the other agency contracts that go to the central ACO's office and in the Comptroller's Office. So that was like a huge bureaucratic win for me, in my opinion. And hopefully we will now be in a position where we can start hiring for that person and moving forward. Steve, do you want to?
Yeah, so maybe just a couple quick comments. Allison's absolutely right. On the private market side, we're actually quite nimble. We use outside counsel. We've got dedicated resources within the Comptroller's Office of the General Counsel. They're outstanding. It's overseen by Irina Tomova, who is fantastic. That runs really well. On the public side, and this isn't a criticism of the individuals, just as Allison said, it's a long process. There are way too many redundancies. We think we can be much more nimble. What we also think is by changing things that we can have more accountability within the Bureau of Asset Management, meaning that if there's something that's held up a contract at BlackRock, for example, that we can get on the phone and we can talk to our relationship managers or professionals over there to get things elevated, to get them negotiated quickly so we can implement faster. And that's a lot of it is just really being on top of it, both on the private and the public side. On the private side, it works well. I sit down and we review contracts every other week. On the public side, we're trying to put the same discipline in place so we can be, again, much more nimble.
Okay, I think we can, unless there are any questions on this. Okay, next slide. And then consultants, one of the things that we found was that across the 5 systems, there are just different reporting requirements, different relationship disciplines, et cetera, between trustees, consultants, BAM consultants, et cetera. There's also a sense that there should be more of a working relationship between the specialty consultants and the general consultants, since general consultants have an overview of the whole portfolio. And so this is not something we are acting on now. The consultant RFPs are mostly up for renewal and have to be reissued in calendar year 2025. And so as part of that RFP process, we will be bringing to this board and the other boards recommended changes that we hope will strengthen the working relationship between BAM consultants and the trustees.
Maybe just to add to that, the relationship we have with the consultants now, general consultants and specialty consultants, relative to BAM, I think they're all working really well. But our observation is, and this has nothing to do with the Bureau of Asset Management, I personally believe, and I think McKinsey also agrees, that there should be more accountability on the part of the specialty consultants into your general consultants. Your general consultants have contractual responsibility for looking at strategic asset allocation. They need to know what's going on in the private assets that have specialty consultants. The coordination, and I don't mean to speak for Callan, it may be okay here. At some of the other plans, it's not optimal, and we think it can be better. So this has nothing to do with BAM getting involved in that process, but just an observation. We do think there's a need for, and a real benefit of having your general consultant see everything and have that holistic view of the portfolio.
I do think that's a great idea. Having more vision into the portfolios makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure there's a lot we could do, as far as, making decisions on how to change it once it's implemented, but just having that knowledge for things like strategic asset allocation does make sense. I thought the last time around when we did the strategic asset allocation, there was a lot more interaction between the specialty consultants and us this time around, which was good.
Great. Okay, next slide, please. So now we want to get into the trustee service compact. So one of the issues that came up over and over again within the McKinsey review and the survey, I think if you remember, McKinsey did a survey with trustees, was there 2 different issues that came up. One, that 75% of BAM staff felt like they have a sense of trustees' investment priorities and beliefs and execute accordingly, and 25% of trustees thought that BAM staff has an understanding of their investment priorities and beliefs and executes accordingly. So that is not a good mismatch, right? Like that does not provide for effective service provision. And so we want to try to resolve that. 2, there was a constant refrain of, well, we trust you guys, but how do we know if we're going to make changes? How do we know that the next controller isn't going to come in and change things back, et cetera? And, I'm sure people were just saying nice things, but they feel that to us, and they feel that way about every transition, et cetera. And one thing that was clear in this was that there's no actual transparency required as part of the investment delegation into the work that BAM does every day, day in and day out over the course of a year. There's also no transparency into the BAM budget proactively. BAM current practice is, like there was a corpus budget approved back in the day. The Bureau of Asset Management spends it and invoices the system, and I believe we vote on the invoices. But we're voting on money already spent, and it is what it is. And so what we are recommending is the establishment of an annual trustee service compact that is basically the contract, the fee-for-service contract between the Bureau of Asset Management and NYCERS, that each year, on the fiscal year calendar, so June of each year for the next fiscal year, would be reviewed, discussed, and approved, that lays out, 1, the NYCERS investment beliefs in a very clear way. We have within our IPS statement, investment beliefs. We should review them every year to make sure, especially because we get new trustees that cycle in and out, to say like, are we still all aligned in this? Is this what if so, great. If not, let's revisit, let's edit. The role of the controller. And then in each trustee service compact, you know, the BAM mission, our service aspirations and commitments, an annual work plan and calendar that lays out for trustees what we are planning to prioritize across the Bureau of Asset Management each year with input from trustees on the front end. And just, this is in convene, but also Kate handed out a paper copy of this draft service compact for review, edits, et cetera. In this year's draft service compact, right, in addition to the BAM's annual work plan and trustee annual calendar, we are recommending a joint manager meeting pilot. And then what we're recommending is that we actually incorporate the investment delegation or use this as part of the annual investment delegation. So as you delegate the investment authority, you're saying we're delegating this investment authority and this is what we're delegating you to do. And then each year it's an opportunity for us to then say what the annual corpus budget is and how it's being spent. And so in this year's Service Compact Act, what we will be reviewing for the rest of this presentation and then hopefully acting on next month are these components of the work plan. In this year's case, we are obviously asking for more additional resources to execute the STAR recommendations, and we have a proposal around a joint manager meeting. Yeah, can you put Mike?
Sorry, push. What's a joint manager meeting pilot?
We're going to get to that in one moment.
Okay, I've been reading ahead.
Okay. You go to the next slide.
Allison?
Yes.
Well, maybe I'm early, but is there a slide on the annual budget process? A separate slide, or is that topic concluded? Because I can wait for the slide if that topic is not concluded.
Just ask the question.
Okay. My question is, what would happen if we don't approve an annual budget?
I believe the same thing that happens if you don't approve the administrative budget, which is we continue to function off the prior year's budget.
Why? I mean, that's a provision of state law.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say this. There's no requirement that we provide the boards with an annual budget prior to acting. What we are doing is we are trying to create a best practice of transparency to provide the boards with that. So I guess ostensibly nothing happens because we continue to operate under the corpus budget that has already been approved, and we move forward and continue to invoice retroactively without the transparency and ability for the trustees to engage on the front end on their priorities of how we spend said budget.
Sure, I understand, but I mean, we trustees know what the approved corpus budget is, so I'm not really seeing why that would be anything other than an opportunity to ask for a larger corpus budget.
I mean, I guess what I would say is I don't understand what the downside is to budget transparency prior to spend. You've raised this at in every other meeting we've been in on this topic, and I still don't understand what proactive transparency of like, we are understaffed here, we're trying to hire more here because it's been like, I don't understand what the downside to being transparent about what we're spending money on is.
My perception of this is that the priorities that BAM has identified are not adequately substantiated in the evidence. And I feel like if this is done every year, the same dynamic will repeat every year.
Adequately substantiated by what evidence? I don't know what you mean.
The evidence that BAM has provided in the form of the McKinsey surveys and the NYCERS surveys.
So you're saying I am trying to understand in non-legal English, because I'm not a lawyer. You don't believe that you oppose the increase in resources because you don't think it's substantiated by the recommendations from the McKinsey study. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, that is good to know.
I also don't really understand how this annual budgeting process will be meaningful if the prior budget just rolls along regardless.
So I guess what I would say is this: at this point in corpus, and if at any point we are requesting more corpus resources, we have to come before the boards. That is what we are doing today, right, actually. So we could continue to do that in a haphazard way, and every 10 years come back before the board and say, we're super, or every 5 years, or we can not ask for more resources every year, or we can come before the boards each year and say, this is how we're spending our money and why, and this is the return we're getting and how that's related. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything.
Yes, I'm a little out of my element in terms of what these particular matters around budgeting and how it's taken care of. The whole idea here, though, is to increase transparency and accountability. Increase transparency in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and making BAM accountable to meeting those needs of the different plans and the trustees particularly. This isn't meant to be too legalistic. From a budgeting standpoint, Brian, my thinking is that you want us to be accountable and you want to know how we're spending corpus money. It's your money. And that's the motivation here. It's not to try to every year come in front and say, ask for constantly more and more money. That's really just, it's transparency and accountability.
I mean,
Look, oh, sorry. So look, I'm in favor of transparency and accountability, definitely. I know how much this request is and anticipate continuing knowing how much this request is. So I don't see that particular step as a meaningful improvement in transparency and accountability, personally. But I'm just one person, and I don't want to monopolize this anymore. I don't think I've asked this at prior meetings, but other people have different perceptions, so I'd rather not be a nuisance.
So I just want to add my 2 cents in, because I can never go without. If there's a component of this that the board feels strongly about, and not just the one trustee, but if the board feels that it's important enough, we can always add language to the compact. We can add language to the delegation. I'd prefer to put it in the compact where we reference that if the board fails to approve additional resources, we default back to the previous year. Very similar to what is in the administrative code with respect to the administrative budgets. To be clear, this is not an administrative budget item. This is under 13705. This would be an investment expense. But I think that it makes sense to consider all of those things within the confines of the compact. And I think this is going to be a living document that we can open up annually to look at and see if it makes sense. So I don't want the process to get in the way of the good intentions here and what we think is actually going to add value to the fund in the long term. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there and remind folks, the service compact, as Allison explained, is not BAM telling you this is it. This is for the board to tell BAM what the expectations are and how we're going to, or I should say how BAM is going to fulfill the needs of the retirement system and systems. They don't all have to look alike. And if NYCERS in particular wanted language that said every year, we need to proactively approve the budget, and if not, it defaults to the previous year, feel free to put that into the compact. I mean, there's no, again, it's about transparency.
Or if every year NYCERS says we don't want to see any budget information, we could add that too.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
We will get this budget notification, like say 2 months prior, so we have time to go through it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the idea is that there would be, we'd aim to take action on the service compact. And I do want to be clear that 95% of the service compact is the work plan, right? And priorities for the following year. And so the idea is you'd get it a month or 2 in advance and have time for feedback. And ideally, if we have time in the board meetings, what I would want to do from a process point is before drafting anything, have a conversation with trustees about what worked this year. One aspect that we're not talking about today is that we want to implement an annual trustee survey, right? So that we can hear in real time from trustees about how they're feeling about BAM work or whatever. Incorporate that into the discussion. Have a conversation with trustees about what you think the priority should be for the coming year, et cetera. Draft the work plan, not entirely, because there's internal BAM work that needs to happen, and Steve should have a lot of, oversight over how he wants reviews to go, portfolio construction, things like that, but that would be, trustee input would be integrated into the original draft, and it would be an ongoing process. Moving forward, I think I don't know that we need to get into too much. So for this year's service compact, one thing we want to do in the coming year is review those investment beliefs that I mentioned. We can go to the next slide. And then joint manager meeting proposal. That is, Ray, now's your opportunity. So one of the things that came out during the McKinsey study is that their perspective is that we as trustees are not actually using our time as trustees as strategically and as effectively as possible. That, you know, we all know from trainings, et cetera, that 90% of our returns come from strategic asset allocation and portfolio construction, and 10% come from individual manager investments. We spend 80 to 90% of our time on individual manager selection at board meetings, and 10 to 15% of our time on strategic conversations about portfolio construction, et cetera. So what we are recommending, and I just want to be clear, this is a recommendation that if any one of 5 systems says no to, we're not going to be able to implement, because it only works if everybody agrees, is that in addition to the individual investment meetings, that we have one monthly joint manager meetings across all systems, joint manager meeting across all systems, and that our potential investment managers come to that meeting instead of coming to each of the 5 individual investment meetings. You can go to the next slide. Or Steve, you want to jump in?
I'm sorry, just a couple quick comments. So the joint manager meeting is geared at trying to be more efficient. We recognize that with an increased allocation across the plans, for the most part, there's going to be more private market deals coming down the pike. There's going to be more customization. We'll be able to do different size deals that right now we basically default to a $275 billion base. In aggregate, we look at the types of deals that can feed that big base of assets. We think that we should be able to do other things with the right staffing level more nimbly, maybe do some smaller, medium-sized deals that have different priorities, different attributes, and that's part of it. The joint manager meeting is intended to, again, focus on efficiency. We're not trying to change the way the boards work, although it seems like we might be doing that. So I just want to reflect, I'm open-minded about different alternatives, and frankly, very respectful of the trustees, their need to see managers. You know, there's a bunch of different iterations we can go down. We can say, well, maybe you don't need to see the re-ups. To be honest, if I'm a trustee, I want to see everything. And I get that. And this is just a way to try to have it be done more efficiently. I should also say up front that not one of your managers has ever come to us and said, well, we don't like having to do 5 meetings. That's not the case, or 4 meetings right now. That's not the case. So it's not an issue for your managers. It's an attempt on the part of BAM to be more efficient. And actually, if you think through it, it's a lot more work for BAM, because we believe there's a lot of other things that we need to produce for the trustees to think about and review. We need to be much more transparent on fees, and we're working on a number of different initiatives around that in terms of trying to calculate alpha for fees and active management, public and private, and to be able to document every time there's a new deal that comes down the pike. It's in the memos. But we want to be very clear in terms of what we're doing, and we think the trustees deserve to know everything we're doing to get the fees down every year. Every time we're in front of one of your potential investors or investments to get the bare bones fees. So that's part of it. So the other thing is that I realize is that it's important for your managers to have direct contact with the trustees as well. And we don't want to impede that either. So it may actually mean that we don't implement the joint manager meeting. If, we talked about a pilot, we've gotten some feedback that's had me reconsider. It's not, the intention wasn't for BAM to re-engineer your workflow. We're trying to be better service providers and try to be more efficient. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And maybe we do something along the lines of maybe embracing technology a little bit more, maybe Zoom presentations where that's required. But again, it's a work in progress. The idea was efficiency and scalability, and not to just impose and go back. No one's mentioned the SIM yet, but that was not the intention, and I know that will come up at some point.
When you talked about strategic analysis of the, oh geez, it just skipped my mind. The allocation, strategic allocation. We're not going to go over that every month, are we? Because once it's done, right, for the year.
Yeah, but there's other things, Larry, that we believe that we should be able to produce, and maybe with your general consultant as well, but peer analysis. How do you stack up against the other big managers of similar size? Fees, and we talked about fees, portfolio construction, deeper dives in terms of what your fixed income portfolio looks like, how it's managed, the opportunities we see out there. We think there's a lot more that we need to do to keep the trustees better informed on what's going on in the portfolio. Allison's absolutely right. Spending 85 or 90 or 90+% of the time on deals, although it might be necessary, and I don't think it's a waste of time, we're missing other things. So maybe we make the meetings longer. Maybe we try to have more of a discipline around the length of the presentations. Maybe when we come to you with these other things, we'll do what's called quick hits. We'll have a 10 or 15-minute presentation to just make sure you're getting the information. And if there are more questions, we could follow up in person.
Just add, Larry, that I agree with your intuition that you should not be reviewing your asset allocation every month and potentially changing it. That's very problematic. So I agree completely. Where I could see value is, in addition to what Steve was saying, so if you think about performance and reviewing performance, it's not just the top line, it's also attribution and asset class performance, construction within the asset class. That can include Cal, and it can include the asset class heads talking about it. So that can be very valuable in terms of not necessarily making any changes, but better understanding what's driving performance and reviewing that. And part of an active decision can be saying, well, we see underperformance in this asset class. This is why. There's good reasons why. We can get comfortable with it, and taking no action can be a form of decision.
Okay, moving on. Oh, yeah, Ray.
I just want to echo what Steve said. I mean, I'm in favor of seeing everybody that comes and wants money. I want to see, because they're not dropping in for a cup of coffee. I mean, they're dropping in for 50 mil. Even if it's a re-up, there's nothing canned about someone coming to you for $50 million, $100 million, which are the checks that we write, and we have to write those checks in order to move the needle a bit. So long-winded way of saying, like, I've always been in favor of seeing any manager that comes to ask for money. Like Pat Stryker, our old friend and colleague, used to say, he said, I want to see the whites in their eyes.
Can I piggyback on what Ray said? The whites of your eyes is actually one of my favorite phrases. And there is something that you get from that. But more importantly, Steve, you just said something, or I think it was you, Steve, who said something about a comparative analysis, peer analysis. So my big concern with not seeing managers for a re-up is that when we have re-ups, we are understanding their historic performance in their portfolio. We're not understanding their portfolio, excuse me, Lord help me. We're not understanding their performance vis-a-vis what's in the market now. Like they re-upped at, we signed on with them 5 years ago, 7 years, however many years ago. Now they're coming out with a new product. Do we know that they actually are best in class vis-a-vis what is now in the market? And I'm not just talking about investment performance risk. I'm also talking about, obviously, the DEI and ESG performance. And so how things are currently is that we are deciding whether to re-up without understanding what our options are. And to me, that's the information that we need to be provided. Whether we do it with or without seeing the whites of their eyes, we still need to have that information. Whether it's BAM or consultants that are doing that comparative analysis, so that we understand that what we're putting our money with now at the current time is currently best in class, not based on, the fact that we've had a relationship with them for 5, 10, 20 years. And I say this understanding that 88% of our portfolio is invested with white male-led firms. So in terms of re-up, we'd have 88% of the people coming back, and we are deciding without knowing what else is out there in terms of, what else is out there. That's it.
So,
And I'm sorry, John, if I just add to that, we hear you on that, and we think that through the service level compact and meeting the individual needs of the plans, that we can do more customization and perhaps focus more on diverse and emerging managers, if that's one of the desires of the trustees. I'd also say around re-ups, we go through the exact same process. We don't just say, okay, you've already approved, let's just do a cursory look at what you do. We do a deep dive. They come in for a green light. They go through our investment committee process. We do a full analysis from scratch every time. And thinking through it in the last couple of weeks, and again, the desire to be efficient shouldn't necessarily short circuit your ability to have those discussions. Also, when a re-up comes through, you have an opportunity to say, well, what went right last time? What didn't go right last time? And how do you think you change things going forward?
Sorry, can I just respond to that? Thank you. I'm certain you do a deep dive into that particular manager. What I'm asking is, are you also looking at the universe to understand that they are the best, that where we are currently invested with is still the best in class for that strategy within that asset class? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
And if you are, we don't see that.
So Keisha, those are good, and we should be transparent around that. Again, leveraging a $275 billion asset base, it usually pushes us towards, we think are the very best managers. And if you look at like private equity, for example, we focus on the top 40 percentile that's out there. Those typically are bigger firms that have, large established presence, and they may not be as diverse as some of the other smaller, medium-sized firms that we may want to bring in over time.
Can I just jump in? I feel like we are now veering into a different topic than the Service Compact Act. I do want to say one thing in response, or joint manager meetings, one thing in response to Keisha too, that one other output from the STAR recommendation that I believe might be in the Service Compact Act as a work product that we want to do this, that we want to implement this year, but Kate, I'm looking at Kate to tell me if I'm wrong, is that one of the things that was also clear that is not transparent is how the BAM pipeline process works. And so trustees, this I think is to your point directly. So trustees only see recommendations that come through the investment committee and are recommended by the investment committee. They don't to date see who have we met with, who makes it to green light, who makes it from green light to investment committee. And so one of the work products over the course of the next year is to change that and provide, I believe we were talking about quarterly, maybe semi-annually, I can't remember, readout to trustees about we met with X number of managers. And by the way, as of about a month ago, every meeting the Bureau of Asset Management takes is on a quarter lag because we are careful about privacy concerns, et cetera, are now posted on the Comptroller's Office public website. So Kate can, I don't remember exactly what the link, but we can circulate that so that all the trustees have it. You can see the names of everybody in BAM meets with externally. But we will be, the BAM will be starting next year presenting on a regular, I can't remember what level of regularity, who we met with managers, who went to green, what managers were met with, what managers made it to green light, what managers made it through green light, and so that there's actually a track record. And so to Keisha, that would answer your question very specifically about how we get to, or to begin to answer, at least provide some transparency about where backlogs are and where challenges lie. So I just want to flag that. I'm going to move us forward because it feels like it does not behoove us to talk about anything else joint manager related, since I think we just officially took it off the agenda. But
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's not
I
my
just wanted
team
to
that's going to
very
be
briefly say I support that particular initiative about pipeline transparency very strongly. It is something that I'm sure not only I, but others hear about. And I would really appreciate it to the extent possible if you can provide as much detail about, the nature of the strategy they might be visiting on, the nature of the mandate they might be trying to get involved with, really as much detail as you can provide so we can really know about the nature of the managers and the nature of their engagement.
Yeah, that's definitely in the works, Brian. And we, we're a public fund. We have an open door policy. We're open to everybody to go, and we get, many emails a day, and we have a process that we go through. So we want to be very transparent and more open-minded, I think, in terms of being able to do smaller deals, more customization over time as well.
Yeah, I just want to add for the last thing, is that if we're going to do this, and it's something that should be done to transparency, obviously, but that needs to come to us before managers come to it. The day of the manager standing there to know comparisons, what I'm supposed to say, oh, well, we just looked at the comparison, and I don't think so. So that should be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we should talk more about this offline because, again, I'm not the. I don't know that it's going to be I don't know that you can compare managers apples to apples, right? Like, I don't know it's going to be like, we looked at these 4 managers and chose that one. I don't know how that process works, but so we should talk offline about what it is but trustees want to see in terms of reporting, and we can maybe do a work group around that. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, let's move on. And I think we are ready to, you go forward, Wilfredo, a few slides. You can keep going, keep going. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Kate to take us through this process.
Okay, hi trustees. So right now, the current budgeted corpus headcount is 70. That is not allocated at all by system, in part because there's no process for that right now. But the annual budget that we have in terms of dollars is 11.1 million. So were you to look at NYCERS specifically, it's a little bit of a fudging since there's no process right now, but it would be about 3.4 million for your awareness. Next slide. Okay, so the proposal that's here before you today, based on the recommendations from McKinsey, would recommend a new headcount of 127 up from that 70 number on the last slide. This would reflect a few things. The first one is a growing total assets under management, which means that as we're bringing more recommendations in front of you, there's more due diligence that has to happen. Similarly, the new asset allocation, moving more money into private markets, reflects just a more complicated private market due diligence process. And then also readying as it basically comes from the will of the trustees for more system-specific customization. The second thing that it does is that it raises current team member salaries based on market comparisons from the Mercer study. We'll get into a little bit more about how we're actually proposing to take the Mercer recommendations and sort of implement them in a way that feels appropriate. And then finally, it reallocates some team members from city-funded to be corpus funded. Those team members we can talk about a little bit more again, but those team members work solely for the benefit of the funds. So the proposal in total amounts to about 1 basis point, which is 0.01% of the AUM of the combined systems, but then on a pro rata basis ends up being the same for your system specifically. So going to the next slide. So as you see here for NYCERS specifically, the total request would be 8.8 million approximately. That's out of a total corpus budget of 28 million. And then, as you know, some folks within BAM are and will continue to be funded by the city. They have responsibilities perhaps that extend beyond just system-specific responsibilities. And so that brings up to 34 million for the total BAM budget. And then the next slide just shows that in comparison to your AUM. You can go to the next slide. Okay, I think Steve wants to take this one.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So let's focus on the new resources in the middle. And the request overall is 21 new additional headcount resources. And you can see they're focused almost entirely on the investment team at 14. And that, again, that is to support more deal flow associated with an increased allocation of private assets, also more customization to do small and medium-sized deals as well. ETIs, Allison talked about the initiatives there as well, and we're hoping to add and do and imagine to do other things in that area. Risk management, Risk management is an important function, perhaps a little misnamed or misnomer, and that what Ed Berman and his team do are a lot more than simply risk management. Ed's the chief risk officer, and he's a very good one, but he is so much more than that. So I've recently asked Ed to take on additional responsibility for portfolio construction across all asset classes. And this is to have a thoughtful way of looking at our exposure, say, in equities. Well, you have public equities, you have private equities. For two of the funds, we have exposure in equities through hedge funds as well. Fixed income, you have private, you got alternative credit. You've got credit obligations in infrastructure and real estate as well. So we want to think about things a little differently. And again, that's very much focused on projects and the different analyses. Like I said earlier, we're trying to come up with a methodology where we can provide the trustees with insight into, well, are you really getting value for money for the fees you're paying on active management? Are you really getting value for the fees you're paying on private versus public assets? And that's a big undertaking. So we've got a good team now that's working really hard, but we think with a few more resources, we'll be able to be that much more nimble. And we're working a little further down financial reporting. That is all about transparency and what we're reporting to the trustees. Again, we've moved Dan Haas into a hybrid role where he is responsible for financial reporting under Lynn Fleischman, our Chief Operating Officer, also responsible for some of the heavy analytics that we have in the risk team. So we're trying to combine a capability where we can have good financial reporting, accurate, of course, but then some really high-end analytics that can actually give you more insight into the portfolios. And the last one, and certainly not least important, is another resource for diversity, equity, and inclusion, working with Taffy O'Delly in terms of moving forward there.
I also just want to remind trustees that, again, this is the 127. We're looking at a total with city-funded positions at 163. So there are folks that exist on teams that you're seeing before you here that aren't reflected on the slide. Am I seeing a question?
I'm sorry. What did you just say about Taffy O'Delly, Steve?
Sorry about that, if that wasn't clear. Okay, so
adding another resource.
Yeah, so you see that the proposed total corpus in the bottom, that's 127. I was just saying there are some folks that exist in BAM that are city funded, myself included. What? Taffy city funded, yeah, for example, and Allison, me, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have the org chart in front of you. This is, and the folks in gray are city, would remain city on the city tax levy funded, and the folks in blue are corpus funded. So for instance, for the DEI and emerging manager team, right now there are 2 people on it. There will be 3 people on it. Then that doesn't count, obviously, the other folks who work on the asset classes in support of that work.
Allison, do you want to touch base on the the prior slide, just the legal team and the resources we have?
Sure. Is it on here? Yeah, it's private market. It's not just private market legal team. We should change that. But the other addition here is that there are currently about 6 lawyers in the Comptroller's Office of General Counsel who also solely function on behalf of the pension funds. Historically, 4 lawyers had been paid by corpus. At some point, there was some weird. The counting changed and they now are paid by city, and so that was when we were smaller assets, and so we have moved them back over to corpus and added 2 legal positions. No new people, they're all already doing the work on behalf of the funds.
Hi. So, right, that the proposal is to increase the salary from 186,000 to 300,000?
We haven't gotten there yet, but you probably are. Let's give us to the next 2 slides, Ray. Give us to the next 2 slides. Kate, I'm handing it back to you, unless we have other questions on this.
I did have a question. I don't know if we should dig in now, but I did have questions about org chart, reporting, levels, et cetera. So I don't know if now's the time.
Let's go through, why don't we go through the whole comp piece and then we'll come back to it, and so we can have one holistic conversation if that's okay.
Okay, I can take this one. So For the compensation study, Mercer provided recommendations at the 75th and 50th percentiles. So they compared us at each of those levels to other government nonprofits, financial service industry, public pensions, endowment, and foundation. Public pension is, of course, the most important one and the one that we're using for the recommendations that you see before us. The one exception is a few titles where they don't have public pension comparables. In those cases, we use just the lowest of the other relevant peer comparisons. If you then look at the next sort of column on the slide, Mercer recommends that we're pursuing the 75th percentile given sort of three things. One is just the size of our AUM being the 3rd/4th largest in the country collectively. A recognition that our structure is complex and that we don't have an incentive program. So going to the next slide. I think, Steve, you wanted to present this one.
Thanks. My finger's getting tired holding the button down. Really, just in terms of our compensation principles, so first and foremost, we want to be able to be competitive in the marketplace, to be able to attract and retain a diverse set of talent, which is challenging at the current levels of compensation. I should also reflect that the compensation levels for a lot of folks that work in the Bureau of Asset Management have not been changed in over 9 years, 9.5 years. If you just look at inflation and the impact on those levels of compensation, it's decreased the purchasing power by about 31%. The other thing is we're proposing a flattened distribution of income, where the CIO position, I happen to be in the privilege of sitting there at this point, but the CIO position's compensation will be pushed down a little bit and put more focus on asset class heads and senior investment officers. I mean, a couple of the other themes that Allison touched on, I'll touch on here, is we want this to outlive the current administration, the current CIO. These are long-term obligations and promises, and we do think that there's an advantage to longevity, and you typically see that more at the asset class level and the SIO than you do at the CIO level. That's just a reality. I'm not going anywhere, and I hope I'm healthy. I'm just saying that you really want this to be something that will outlive administrations and will go on. So a little more focus there, which we think puts us in a competitive position. And lastly, we've been very cognizant of the fact that we work for a public entity, we work for the New York City government, and we don't want to go in with salary requests that are outside of what would be considered reasonable. So we are making the proposal, the requests based on those understandings as well. On average, and you'll see the numbers in a moment, BAM is proposing salaries that are 3% below Mercer's 50th percentile of total compensation, and 22% lower than the 75th percentile. And remember, that was what Mercer recommended from a compensation level. So we're trying to be realistic and reasonable. I think at the levels that we're going to show you, we think we'll be able to bring in and retain the right people. And with the increased headcount, I think we'll be much more nimble and faster and be able to implement things more successfully.
Yeah, I think it's been made known that I'm not happy with this, and I've talked to my president, and I don't understand why we're doing less than 50% when, as Mercer pointed out, we're more complex. We've had retention problems, we all know, every time there's a new administration, and we want to attract minorities and others who can be someplace else. We want to give a salary that allows people to believe that, okay, this is a place I can stay, I can get a pension, I can still live in amongst my peers in the city of New York without straining, and for all the time I went to school and all the being at Goldman and all that other stuff. We want to be able to attract those people. So I don't know why we're doing less than. It sounds political to me, so that you can tell the newspaper, not you personally, but the newspapers, oh, well, we're doing less than 50%. It makes no sense to me. We're the 3rd largest in the country, and we're paying salaries that are not commensurate. I mean, the 70 percentile makes more sense to me, or even at a if you want to argue, we'll do 60%. Makes more sense to me than to be able to. I mean, if I'm coming to work here and you say, well, we're giving you 3% and then 50%, than the rest of the country for smaller, less complicated places you could go work. So why don't you come work for us? I'd be like, thanks, but no thanks.
I appreciate the sentiment and support, Larry, and I can't dispute what you're saying in any way. From my perspective, it's not meant to be political. It's meant to see what we can reasonably be done. Yeah, but I mean, your points around, New York City, we're the third largest combined. I think New York City, I think the employees of New York City, of which I'm in a NYCERS plan as well. I hope to benefit from that someday, but they deserve the very best public pension plan in the country, and if not the world. And I think we're getting there. Compensation matters. More importantly, people matter. Now, not everyone comes to work just to make a dollar. And I have to admit here that it's not all about money either. It's about, coming to an organization that values the individual, that gives them a voice, that gives them a career track, that allows them to stretch and grow and develop over time. So those are all important things. Gives them training. So it's those intangibles, I think, also make a difference. And we've already done a lot of that. Now we're just trying to finish the comp part. I don't know, Allison, if you have any comments.
Brian, do you want?
So, look, I don't expect Steve to argue forcefully against getting greater compensation than what's in the proposal, but I'll do it. Sorry if this is repetitive. I sit on 4 boards. I kind of have no other choice than to be repetitive sometimes. I just don't, I've looked at the Mercer study very closely. I don't really agree with the construct that this even is the appropriate 50 percentile level. We are unique among public sector plans of our size in the amount of external management that we do. We do almost exclusively, not exclusively, but really almost exclusively external management. Our fees are much higher than our peers already. I've looked at a lot of examples of other systems that have changed their compensation structures internally, and that is usually described as a way of saving money on external management fees because you're doing things internally and not doing them externally anymore. That's just not something that's going to happen as a result of this proposal, and that's not something that was corrected for in the Mercer compensation study. So I just don't agree with the construct that this percentile is an accurate percentile by which to evaluate an appropriate compensation level for BAM or the pension funds. I mean, we are complex, but we also have an unusually high number of consultant resources to avail ourselves of, and we have an unusually high number of external managers to avail ourselves of as well.
Anyone else want to jump in before we get to the figures? The one question I have, and I don't know if this is sure, I'm not quite sure. I don't know that our fees are actually higher than peers, but I don't believe they are, and I know that is something that Steve and team are analyzing and assessing, so I would push back on that point. But anything else on this before we move to the actual?
Just for my understanding of what I'm looking at here. So where it says 50% proposed and say the third one down minus 61K, that means.
So why don't we go, we haven't gotten to that slide yet, so let's get there. Before we do, I just want to say that I just want to flag 2 other things, unless Kate, you want to jump in, that as part of, in order to keep the Mercer costs down, we were able to look at 25 unique roles. We have more jobs than that within BAM, and so we went through a process to map positions with one another. So the job titles that you'll see on the next slide don't represent every single job title within the Bureau of Asset Management, but not every job title, but the vast majority of job titles are mapped here. There were certain job titles that we had to exclude because of civil service rules and the fact that they are not actually unique to investment, and so that existed as well. And then the last thing before we can go to the next slide, as I say this, what we were actually recommending is, is the next slide the salaries or the money?
This the salaries.
Okay, so we'll do the salaries and then I'll get to the money.
Next slide, Wilfredo.
Okay, so, right, this is, Kate, can you explain what is on this slide, or Steve, somebody explain what is on this slide and answer Ray's question in the process? Steve's handing it to you, Kate.
Okay, so what you're looking at on this slide so those 25 titles on the left. then you're looking at the current salary. Now that this is, again, not exact, there's some ranges within our bureau, but a general estimate of the current salary. In the next column, you'll see estimated May 2024. This is assuming basically that the salaries in the first column are adjusted for all of the managerial raises. Again, that's a little more complicated in practice. It's an estimate for awareness. The next column in green is the proposal. And then the following columns are comparing to Mercer. So the next column, the closest one, 50, is comparing in an absolute value, the proposal versus Mercer at the 50th percentile, and then the same thing percentage-wise, and then the following two columns are the same thing for the 75th percentile. Is that clear?
It's been a long time since I've sat in a classroom. So if I read this right, then under the 50% proposed for the last job title, OGC Council, so 300,000 is yet 88,000 below the analysis that was done with
Correct.
Mercer. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
I'd say the only last takeaway on this slide is that you can see that there's more red on the very top line. It's meant to compress that level of compensation down and try to put more, as I said, into the deputy CIOs also have dual responsibility of being asset class heads, but focusing on asset class heads and then the senior investment officers, and obviously the other leaders in terms of chief operating officer, chief risk officer, et cetera.
And can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry. And I just also want to remind folks that we'll talk more about this in a minute, but what the boards would be voting on is the compensation for those paid for by corpus, and then we have to go through if there are people who are impacted by the comp study who are paid for by city tax levy and not corpus, then that becomes that is a parallel but different process that has to be executed through the Comptroller's Office, HR, administrative staff, et cetera.
And also, does this include, excuse me, sorry. And also, does this include the redesignation of certain positions?
Yeah, this is just titles. When we get to the next slide, it includes the redesignation. The overall budget request includes redesignation of certain positions.
Before we move to the next slide, I just wanted to say that Brian, what you said around, I heard what you said. What you were saying around fees, I would love to know more about, where we land on that. Two, I differed with you a little bit, not to say different, I was just saying, I feel like the difference is that they are investing for 5 systems, whereas I think our peers mostly are investing for 1, if I'm not mistaken. And so to me, I do see why, in addition to most expensive, expensive market and huge asset class base, it feels different for me. But I am really curious about the issue you raised around consultants supporting us and how much money we spend on consultants. And obviously we're going into our RFP process around that. So perhaps we reevaluate and, come to understand what our resources are. And I don't know if that is part of this entire proposal. I don't think it is, but just understanding what we're spending on consultants vis-a-vis this proposal, I think is a valid issue that you raise. I just wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, so look, I don't expect everyone to just agree with what I'm saying. So there's no need to even mention that you disagree with me. Like, that's completely fine. In terms of complexity, like I said on multiple boards, I understand that there's a degree of complexity that goes into it, but nearly every deal that we do is a pro rata allocation among those boards. So while there's a certain amount of meeting structure that is, I don't know if it's more complex exactly, but there is additional work that goes into it. I am not sure how much it affects the actual deal sourcing. And I imagine there can be nuances around strategic asset allocations and differences between the systems on the margins, but I am not sure it adds such an enormous amount that it's like 5x what other systems deal with.
Got it, thanks.
Yeah, Robert.
Can we just elaborate on OGC counsel, what that specific title is? Is that the GC or is that?
No, that is, and Steve can talk, can talk in more detail, but we have lawyers in the Office of General Counsel now who will likely potentially move into Bureau of Asset Management who solely negotiate side letters, contracts, et cetera, with our investment managers. And so they are actually financial services attorneys who happen to be housed in OGC. And we might even want to change the title because that there's a chance that they are no longer be housed in OGC, but that is what they do.
Yeah, just, I mean, I touched on it earlier. We've got some really good attorneys, and there's so much documentation and legal work that goes in with any of the private deals, and it's ongoing. There's ongoing consents. There's, issues around co-invest from time to time, non-disclosure agreements. The contracts themselves are amended. We get, anytime there's a change to the most favorite nation, any of the terms change, all that has to be reviewed and processed by legal. I have the benefit of reading it and signing it as well. That usually keeps me here 2 hours a night, but the folks we have working on your contracts and documentation are excellent. They really are terrific. We want to make sure we can retain them.
And I don't want to nitpick, and for the record, I support paying general counsels the maximum amount that we possibly can. But I do believe that the title itself is a little troublesome.
I think that's a valid point, and we will change that moving forward.
Just for your benefit, Rob, methodologically, this number was reached because the Mercer survey could not purportedly identify counterparts for this position in public pension plans. I can tell you that they exist. Like, there are people who are attorneys in public pension plans whose job is to negotiate investment matters. It's really not that uncommon a position. So honestly, I regard that just as a failure of the Mercer methodology. I mean, I do not think you will find more than 1 or 2 attorneys in the entire country who are employed by the public sector who make $388,000. There's no way. There's no way that is the median, the 50% median.
I don't disagree with you, Mr. Chair, on that one.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so prior slide, we had gone over the numbers of staff requested by team. This is just simply a budget way of looking at it by cost per team. You can see the vast majority of cost is in the investment team. Next slide. So, what happened to the charts?
They were above. We went past them.
Oh, can we go back to
Can you
them?
go back, Wilfredo, to keep going? Back,
That's what I was hoping to talk about.
Back. These.
Oh, sorry. This is what, okay. Can you go back one? So what we were requesting, this is the nuts and bolts, the totals here, right? So what we're saying is we actually want to request 1 basis point, approximately 1 basis point of NYCERS and really across all 5 systems to go into personnel at BAM. That amounts to $8.8 million for BAM, for NYCERS, a total of $28.8 million across all 5 systems, and the total BAM budget that includes the city tax levy resources would then be $34.893. That is about a doubling, to be transparent, of the BAM personnel budget, because the combination of increased resources, new requests, and moving some folks over from city to Corpus to rationalize it. But as you can see from the next slide, 1 basis point is 0.001% of our AUM. Right, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually a very minimal cost for the services provided, and it is, and we believe, it's our understanding from McKinsey that most of the CalPERS, CalSTRS, et cetera, pay about 2.2 to 3 basis points, so 0.002%, I guess, towards personnel in their systems. So Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything or just nod it.
No, that's correct.
Okay, so now I know there are tons of questions and discussion, so who wants to start?
I had asked that we look at least a 60% percentile and what it would cost.
Okay, yes, you would, Larry had asked offline if we had the 75%, how much it would cost. Do you have that figure?
I do, just give me about 30 seconds to pull it up.
Okay, we have it. Any other questions? Keisha, I know you said you had questions. I don't know.
I do actually, sorry. I'm
Kate,
sorry to
answer the question and then we'll.
But yes, I can answer the question. So Larry, it's a bit of a crude analysis because if you look at the Mercer study, basically some salaries in relationship to each other don't make as much sense as we would want. But if you do that kind of crude analysis, it would ultimately end up being on the corpus budget alone, 36 million at the 75th percentile. And that's across systems, of course, so I can get you the.
It's about 1.5. One and a half. Okay, Keisha.
Yep, so I've been just trying to understand, everybody around this table knows that I'm especially concerned about diversity. And so I've been trying to understand what are some of the best practices in the systems to get the results that, pension systems to get the results that, that people are saying that they are seeking. And one of the best practices, several of them, we're really far off from. So what I understand is that one of the best practices is to have the folks that are focused on diversity work are within the investment reporting structure. They're not outside of the investment reporting structure. So I am concerned about where our diversity staff sits. I'm also concerned about the level at which they sit. That is the other thing, is I understand that that in other systems where this is actually really successful, you have, and we know this just in general in terms of management, you need to have people at the table at senior levels to advocate for certain initiatives in order to achieve the result. And we have Taffy sitting at a low level in a different function. And so I think that we need to have the diversity staff integrated into the investment structure. There needs to be, first of all, she, in my view, from what I understand about kind of the credentials of the senior investment officers, that she's on par with some of the senior investment officers, that it makes sense for her to elevate her so that she is at the same kind of reporting and compensation and title level, and therefore respected by the senior investment officers. And frankly, I also think that we also need someone who's at the deputy CIO level, who has the authority and can advocate, because that's what we all know we need at the most senior levels in order to advocate for certain initiatives. So that there's someone who can advocate and sponsor and be at the table with the deputy CIOs and with you, Steve. So I am, and then one last thing about this. So I'm concerned about where she is, the level she's at, the amount of staff support that she has. I know, for her to be able to report out to us the last couple of times, it took her months to be able to get the work done because she doesn't have support staff. I know that in this budget, she's been allocated one additional person, an analyst, but I wonder if that is enough. And then finally, in terms of transparency, I was thrilled to hear that BAM is, God, that hurts holding this button down for this long. That BAM is focused on focused on transparency. There isn't transparency around our staff, the diversity of our BAM staff. As far as I can tell, it's woefully undiverse. And in my view, we also should be reporting out. BAM should be reporting out on the makeup of our team, in particular because we are asking our investment managers to come before us and report out around where they are and what their team, the diversity statistics of their teams are. We, trustees, should understand what the makeup of our team is, and also what kinds of measures are being taken by BAM to improve upon where we are, just like we ask our investment managers to come before us and do in every single meeting. So those are some of the issues. and concerns that I raised in particular as we're looking at adding a huge headcount. I don't necessarily differ with you that we need the headcount to get the work done. I want to make sure that as we're adding this headcount, that we are employing the best practices in terms of recruiting and retaining diverse talent so that other people can get to play in this game.
Great. So can I start, Steve, and then hands it off to you? Because you can talk more about the investment integration, but I just want to say a couple things. So one, I think anything that relates to sort of personnel and performance issues, we should talk about in executive. I will say in public session, to your point, Taffy is actually tagged along with the senior investment officers for the comp review and that position. The one thing I realized that you're raising that I did not mention in the headcount, and maybe we can go back, is I actually didn't talk about the results of the economically targeted investment search. And how we're integrating that here. And so I don't know if we can go back to the headcount by team, but what was the economically targeted investment, we're actually, I think, somewhat using this shorthand to both integrate economically targeted investment and more high-level senior focus on MWBE and diverse investments. But what came out of the ETI recommendation is three new headcount, including either an asset class level head or even potentially a deputy CIO level head who can oversee ETI's diverse managers and the whole ESG program. And so what we are contemplating doing once we get the resource allocation is actually posting for both of those positions to see who we get and whether we find somebody at a high enough level. So that is contemplated and integrated. I will say, and I'll leave it to Steve to talk about how that program is currently integrated, and we expect that work to be integrated within the new hires of each of the asset classes as well. But Steve, do you want to jump in and add anything else?
Yeah, maybe just very briefly. So I agree with your assessment of, and we should talk about compensation and executive, but I agree with your assessment of Taffy. I think she's terrific. But just in terms of where she sits, and I'll talk about the org chart in a minute, I physically have her sitting adjacent to my office. Between myself and Petra Nikolova, who is also deputy CIO, and right next to Anashka Jell is the other deputy CIO. So she's put there intentionally. She's on the investment committee. I actually believe everything we do in ESG and DE&I has got to be fully integrated into everything we do on the investment side. When we look at investments, we always look through an ESG lens, and that incorporates everything. And I think John Adler, as the head of that group, has done a fantastic job. He's been a real resource. John sits on the asset class head meetings, sits in on those. He's a member of the investment committee. He's a member of the operating committee. Taffy also sits on the investment committee. She sits in all those meetings, as well as a couple other committees.
The other thing I meant to say, and I did not, is we do actually, starting about a year ago, the Comptroller's Employee Services Department started tracking demographic makeup of each bureau, and we actually get that information each quarter, and we can start sharing that with trustees.
Allison, you want to talk about the plans to improve? I mean, there are a number of initiatives in terms of better recruiting.
Yeah, I don't know if Kate wants to even jump in, but we have begun to institute a number of hiring practice, equity in hiring practices to try to improve our hiring processes and make them more equitable, mandatory interview panels, pre-approved questions. As part of this, we are still trying to, as part of this resource request on the city side, we are still trying to hire somebody specifically focused on recruitment and training. And Kate, I don't know if there's anything else to add there.
Those are some of the main things. Another thing we've been working on is building up a sort of a list of recruitment sites so that when that person comes in, and even in the meantime, led by our internal HR for the Comptroller's office, we're doing a lot more proactive outreach to associations in order to get basically folks into the fold who aren't otherwise hearing about these opportunities.
Yeah, can I ask about the fact that I think it had been discussed that there would be a dedicated ESG, DEI, SIO in each of the asset classes that would work with the DEI and ESG directors. and to ensure that there's a conversation that's constantly going on when they're looking at sourcing, when they're looking at who they're inviting, when they're actually going through, and also to have the DEI director sitting in just like the ESG director in green lighting, not just at the IC meeting, but green lighting to begin the process of going through things from the beginning.
So I would say I'm open-minded, Larry. The green light actually isn't the full investment committee. It's a much smaller committee. And that's really just to see, and it's a lower bar to get through, meaning that we, if it gets to that point, we've got a pretty good idea that we like them. The investment committee, actually the senior folks, so it's myself, I have a majority vote, well, I have a weighted vote more than the DCAOs who have more than we actually rotate through the asset class head. So investment committee and Greenlight has the same composition, but the two of those rotate and change throughout each quarter. I'm open-minded, like I said, to be more inclusive. I think we do a pretty good job. I think we do a better job. One of the challenges I'm sorry to say this might be indelicate, but we've actually had some really good diversity candidates come in for positions, and we haven't been able to execute. And unfortunately, those individuals are not as plentiful on the street. They're harder to attract. It's harder for us to compete, and a lot of it has to do with compensation, I'm afraid. So
thank you for making my point. Things are not going to change unless there's some intentionality. And so the compensation, while it's not the only thing, obviously we can't compete with the private sector, but we should make it at least attractive enough so that somebody who does want to work for people and not necessarily for profit still can live the life that they would live because the reason they went and got the MBA.
And we like I said, we're proactively searching out those individuals. I know Kate, talked about a number of the initiatives we have. Kate, what's the other one that to Keisha's point in particular around turning the lens on ourselves? It was an outside entity. Was it parking?
Lennox Park is, we're in the final stages finally of actually getting that. And in addition to them assessing our outside managers, they'll be assessing us as well.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were assessing you as well. I just want to say amen and ditto to what you just said about needing to be able to compensate people in order to attract diverse talent. In particular, there's just, not to get too big and lofty, but there's so much work to be done in Black and Hispanic communities to close a wealth gap that Black and brown people need to be extremely intentional about pushing. Generally, we tend to be very intentional about trying to maximize our wealth generation, in particular people who go to business school and have MBAs and et cetera, et cetera. I'm babbling, but I just have to say, like, compensation is incredibly important if you want to attract diverse talent, as is having the authority to actually make a difference within the organization that you're in. And being able to, to actually move the mission along. It is, no one, wants to come to work to be, with lack of, to use an inartful term, to be a cog. People want to make a difference. So, having the authority, seniority, compensation, the things that make a difference for everybody, but in particular for diverse talent.
Thanks, Keisha. And I touched a little bit on that point earlier in terms of giving people voice. It's some of the intangibles that really, once people hear, what do we do with them? And one of the things I love best about my job is watching people get ahead, watching people stretch and grow and develop their career. It's something that I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of, something I'm completely committed to. And that's at all levels of the organization. Again, let people stretch, grow, find their best level, expand their horizons, and we're trying to do more and more of that, and trying to provide more training as well. We'd like for the Bureau of Asset Management to be a career destination. It's not always going to be. We're going to have some turnover, and people are going to come in and get some great experience and move on. But at the more senior levels, we really like to have stability, and again, that's reflected in the proposed compensation levels.
Can I just say, Kate, I would love to connect with you to talk about some of the work that you're doing around outreach, et cetera, et cetera. So let's make that happen.
Yes. Is a discussion about the Evergreen program and discretionary funds, is that for later?
think that is for the, yes, that should be as part of the investment conversations. Any other questions or comments on STAR? Yeah, Robert.
First of all, on behalf of my principal, thank you for your thoughtful and recommitted approach to diversity here. It's a top priority. So thank you on behalf of the Bronx. And I just do want to say also, I don't see compensation and questioning parts of the study that it's based on as mutually exclusive. So I don't want to have this kind of divisive tone when I don't think it's incredibly helpful. I think that there are clearly things that they have expertise on that are easily assessed in the market, and then there are things that are not, and council is just one of them. So before we end, or maybe after we end at some time, if we can come to the table on some of these positions and titles that maybe were based upon whether it's just too difficult to assess or whether they got it wrong. I think as trustees, it would be nice to come to the table and decide how we're going to address those specific titles.
And I just want to be clear, like, we expect this to be a discussion, right? So the hope is that we can get as far as we can to try to complete the discussion by next month so that we can implement in the start of the fiscal year. So we will try to set up offline conversations to discuss different specific roles, et cetera, as soon as possible. And if we can't make that deadline, we can't, but hopefully that is definitely the goal. So, but we will definitely set up some time offline to talk about the specific titles. And if there are specific personnel or questions that folks have, we can do that as well and go from there.
Okay, so if there's no other items, and again, as Allison said, always available to talk about this offline. With that, I'd make a motion to exit public session and enter into executive session.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, any abstentions, hearing none, the motion carries. Okay, we are now going into executive session. I would ask that the camera. So we have been asked to add one item by unanimous consent to the public agenda. Ms. Winery, I'll, before I turn it over, relinquish the microphone to the mayor's office as chair. I'll just ask if there are any objections to adding an item to the public session.
No objections.
Okay, let the record reflect that there are no objections. I believe that the rules of NYCERS provide that we need unanimous consent, and there appears to be unanimous consent to add the item to the agenda. So I'll turn it over to the chair, understanding that besides noting the approvals in an executive session, we now need to take a vote on the added item, which I believe we could turn it over to, yes,
Board Rule 3 limits trustees to 2 conferences a year unless they have board approval. Larry Bosley has requested to attend a 3rd conference, the 2024 RFK Compass Summer Investors Conference in Massachusetts, and the board would need to approve his attendance at a 3rd conference during the year.
So I move for board approval. Can I get a second? Second? Okay, great. So moved.
All right, so with that, Melanie, I believe you could do a report out, and then we can, and then I'll make a motion.
The board agreed to commit funds to 1 alternative credit, 1 private equity, and 2 real estate investments. The details of these transactions will be shared at a later date.
So with that, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. So I made a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Aye.
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 Okay.
Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Meeting's adjourned.